Welcome back to the quiet journey of tonight. Today, we will listen together to one of the ancient Zen stories, the teachings that have guided countless people through the centuries, helping them find peace and clarity in their hearts in the midst of this turbulent world. Before you begin, let your body rest naturally. Feel your own weight fully supported by the ground. Inhale slowly, deeply, and then exhale very gently. Everything doesn't need to be rushed. Let the breath take you back to the present, the only place where true stillness can be found. The Zen stories you're about to hear aren't just bedtime stories. They are the ancient whispers of awakened souls, the echoes of those who have faced the essence of existence directly. They have discovered something that most of us often forget. Peace is not born from changing the outside world, but from how we respond to it. There is a Zen proverb that says, "When the mind is quiet, the universe carves itself accordingly." And the moment you really listen, when your thoughts begin to calm down, you'll realize there's an open space within you, where the deepest things can resonate. Today, the story we're exploring talks about the difference between seeing and actually experiencing. The story is called The Blind Calligrapher of Mount Furano, the Temple in the Clouds and Mist. On the high peaks of the Furano region, where the clouds of mist are white all year round, there is an ancient temple that has existed for centuries. The old wooden sticks of the temple are imbued with the scent of smoke and the prayers of generations. Each stone, every bell beat, seems to contain a layer of age-old meditative memories. Inside that sacred place, there was a monk named Kenjiro. He had been blind since birth. He had never seen sunlight, never seen a human form or a mountain out there. However, strangely, Kenjiro is famous throughout the country for his extraordinary calligraphy skills. It is said that his pen strokes have a strange vitality. Each ink line seems to carry the breath, the pulse of heaven and earth. His fame spread far and wide, crossing forests, mountains, and rivers, causing many students and pilgrims to come to witness that miracle with their own eyes. They sat in silence, watching Kenjiro's hand gently hold the quill in his hand, moving on the white paper as if guided by a source of knowledge beyond reason. Those strokes are not only accurate, but also alive, a stillness but powerful, like a mountain in the sky. The skeptic guessed. One autumn day, when the golden leaves began to fall on the old stone steps of the temple, a special guest appeared. It was Hayashi, a famous calligraphy master. He had heard a lot about Kenjiro and the miracles of this blind monk, but his heart was full of skepticism. How can a person who can't see anything write such perfect characters? He wondered. Hayashi entered the shrine with curiosity mixed with a hint of pride. His voice rang out, as cold as the air on the mountains. I want to see with my own eyes the magic that everyone is talking about. The monks in the temple humbly invited him to sit down. When the blind monk appeared, his every movement exuded lightness and calmness. He bowed his head in greeting, and then carefully prepared the ink. The bamboo pen was chosen. The ink stick was sharpened on the stone in slow, meditative circles. His breathing was steady, as if he was in tune with the pulse of heaven and earth. But instead of starting to write, Kenjiro gently handed the pen towards the visitor. Master, he said, will you please write for me the word mountain? Hayashi smiled confidently. He wrote tens of thousands of characters like this in his life. His pen strokes flew strongly and decisively, carrying the mastery of many years of hard work. When the word mountain is completed, it is indeed perfectly balanced and beautiful. Kenjiro lowered his head, gently running his hand over the paper, feeling every dry line with his fingertips. A gentle smile appeared at the corner of her lips. "Sir," Kenjiro said quietly, "I can feel the firmness and power in your writing. Obviously, you've seen a lot of mountains in your life." Hayashi nodded, somewhat proud. But then Kenjiro asked softly, "Then please ask, have you ever become a mountain?" That question fell into a quiet void like a long bell. Hayashi frowned. "You don't understand. Become a mountain? How is that possible?" Kenjiro smiled, took the pen back, and said in a deep voice, "When I write mountain, I don't see its shape with my eyes. I only feel the deep silence that resides in the heart of the rock. I feel its weight pressing down into the ground, its roots reaching to the heart of the earth. I felt its peak touch the sky, where the clouds melted and the wind was born. In that moment, I was no longer a writer. You are the mountain." Then he bent down and slowly put his pen on the paper. When the mountain writes itself, those present held their breath. Every stroke of Kenjiro's pen appeared as if it did not come from his hand, but from the paper itself. Each dark ink line carries a weight, a unique rhythm of life. It seemed that the mountain was rising on its own from the white page. Curves, such as geological timelines. Each horizontal stroke carries within it the weight of thousands of years of silence. When the letter was finished, Hayashi saw something he had never seen before. The character had depth, as if the roots were embedded in the paper, and the top of the letter was beyond the physical limits. Kenjiro put down his pen and said softly, "The character writes himself. You are only the temporary hand of the mountain." No one said anything, only silence enveloped, as if the whole temple was breathing in the same beat. The truth that can't be hid. When people recount this story, they often remember the Buddha's words, "Three things cannot be hidden for long: the sun, the moon, and the truth." And indeed, what Kenjiro shows is not his technique or talent, but the unity between the person and the thing that is manifested. He didn't try to imitate the shape of the mountain. He became a mountain, so the mountain naturally appeared. The profound lesson behind this story is this: true mastery does not come from accumulating knowledge, but from erasing the gap between us and what we are experiencing. We often know a lot of things, but we rarely really know them. We can talk about love with hundreds of theories, understand the mechanisms of hormones and psychology, but when love comes, our hearts still tremble as if it were the first time. We can learn about meditation for years, memorize how to breathe, how to sit, but forget that meditation is simply breathing, being present. We can study all the principles of leadership, but true power only comes when we really care, when our minds are in harmony with others. The blind and the wisdom of the beginning mind. Kenjiro, with his blind eyes, is a symbol of what Zen Buddhism calls a beginner's mind, a mind that is not bound by experience or prejudice. Since he had never seen a mountain, he was not confined to stereotypes or aesthetic conventions. Blindness is not a limit, but a door that opens to a different way of seeing. Direct, undifferentiated, pure. Zen master Dogen once said, "To study the Buddha's path is to study yourself. To study yourself is to forget yourself." When we forget our little self, the one who always wants to control, who wants to prove, who wants to do right, we open ourselves up to something bigger to flow through. Kenjiro is no longer a mountain rider. He let the mountain write for itself. That is the ultimate art of all action. When the ego disappears, the real life begins to manifest. Wisdom in letting go. That story invites us to look back at ourselves. Are we trying to know about life, or are we really living? When we walk, do we become a person who is walking? When we listen, do we become listening itself, without analysis, without judgment? When we love, do we allow love to happen on its own, without hesitation, without fear? Hayashi, the renowned calligraphy master, symbolizes the usual human path of learning: practice, accumulation, analysis, technical perfection. That path is valuable, but if we stop at the surface, it becomes a subtle trap of the ego, where we admire our own abilities instead of dissolving into the flow of creativity. True mastery, as Kenjiro teaches, comes from letting go. Let go of what we think we know. Let life manifest itself through us. A seasoned surgeon no longer thinks every step, but his hand moves intuitively. A talented musician is no longer trying to make music. He disappears into the music, letting the sound flow on its own. A father and mother truly listen to their children, not according to the theory of teaching children, but with the natural understanding of love. All of them, in that moment, were just like Kenjiro. They became what they were doing. Laughing at the sky. When night falls, you can try practicing this. Whether it's writing a word, washing dishes, taking a walk, or listening to someone, try to be the action itself. Don't try to do it well. Allow yourself to be that. Write as if the words themselves are writing through you. Walk as if the road is passing you. Love as if love itself is falling in love through you. The Buddha once taught, when you realize everything is as perfect as it is, you'll lift your head and smile at the sky. That perfection is not in technique, not in achievement, but in the ability to let go of the ego, to let life flow through us naturally, like ink flowing on paper, like the breath that enters and dissipates. And perhaps when you understand that, you'll realize that Kenjiro has never been blind. It is we who see too many images without actually experiencing them, who are living in the dark. The blind calligrapher simply opened his eyes with his soul and let the mountains for life, for the truth. Write for yourself. Wisdom lies in distinguishing between situations that require external action and those that require only internal acceptance. But in order to have that distinction, one needs a clear mind, not clouded by hasty reactions. That's what Abbot Soren quietly taught his disciples, not through theory, but with a cat. After that meditation, as the monks returned to their daily routines, sweeping leaves, carrying water, chopping firewood, there was still an indescribable echo in the air. This silence is not just the absence of noise, but a kind of living stillness where every action is permeated with awareness. It is said that even the sound of bamboo brooms sweeping the yard that day sounded with a lighter rhythm than usual. Eisen, who had been irritated by Tama, sat on the wooden porch watching the cat fall asleep. The morning sunlight poured through the cedar canopy, falling into bright pieces dancing around its stout body. He suddenly burst out laughing, a smile as light as the wind. How many days have you allowed your mind to be stirred by a tiny creature like this? It wasn't Tama who lost his temper. He himself had lost it. Soren walked over, holding a smoky cup of tea. He didn't say anything, just sat down next to him. The two of them looked at the cat together. After a long time, Soren said quietly, "You see, peace is not something that is created. It's just covered." Eisen lowered his head, and the words were like a bell ringing in his heart. It suddenly occurred to him that any attempt to achieve tranquility, if it still carried the notion of reaching, would destroy itself. For reaching is the action of a person who is running, while peace can only come to the one who knows how to stop. From that day, Shenji Temple had a new ritual. Every time Tama enters the meditation hall, instead of gently dispelling or quietly enduring, the monks bow to him gently, like greeting a distinguished guest, or rather, a young teacher, because they now understand that Tama is the daily test of their minds. One day, Tama walked in, made a loud meow, and left. The whole meditation hall was as quiet as a sheet. One day, it sits in the lap of an old monk for the whole session. Its warmth blends into the human breath, becoming part of meditation. Occasionally, a visitor to the temple would laugh. "Why do you let the cat sleep while you meditate?" A monk replied, "Because sometimes he meditates even deeper than we do." From that story, the temple becomes a pilgrimage point for those who are seeking peace in the midst of a turbulent life. People hear the name Shenji's cat as a living metaphor for the wisdom of Zen. And in conversations with guests, Eisen often said, "We all have a Tama cat in our lives, a thing, a person, or a memory that always stirs our hearts. But chasing it away never brings peace. Only when I look directly at it without judgment can it rest on its own." The modern world, with its incessant alarm bells, is a meditation hall full of Tama. Every phone vibration, every unanswered email, every online comment can be a meow that pulls us out of the present moment. We often think that we are distracted by work, by others, by circumstances. But in reality, we are only distracted by our own minds that refuse to be still. A modern Zen master once said, "Stillness is not in a room without sound, but in the mind that does not resist the sound." If we can sit still in the midst of the sounds of the city, in the midst of the bustling traffic, in the midst of endless requests and texts, and still maintain a deep breath, a silent gaze, then we are sitting with Tama in the very Shenji temple of our hearts. Someone asked Eisen years later, "Did you ever really reach a state where you were no longer distracted?" He smiled and shook his head. "No. I just learned not to be distracted by the fact that I was distracted." The answer sounds like a paradox, but it is in that paradox that the truth hides. Peace is not the complete removal of disturbance, but the loss of the possibility of being stirred by it. When we no longer fight agitation, it loses its power to shake us. That is the normal mind that Zen masters often talk about. The mind is not special. It does not try to be static. But it is naturally static because there is no reason to be uneasy. One afternoon, when the sunset dyed the old tile roofs purple, the old and weak Tama lay on the steps. It is no longer as agile as it used to be. Eisen, now the abbot, sat next to him and caressed him. "Are you teaching me the last lesson again?" he said quietly. Tama Lim narrowed her eyes and made a soft sound, as if agreeing. As night fell, the cat left its body in absolute silence, just as it had once entered the meditation hall in the past. Eisen buried it under the largest cedar tree in the garden, where the early morning light always shone first. On the small stele, he engraved only 4 words, "Master of Silence." Years later, the pilgrims still go there, stopping under the tree, listening to the wind rustling through the leaves, as if they still hear the growl of the cat every year. And sometimes, one of them suddenly notices the stillness is not on the outside, but in their own breath. From Tama's story, one realizes a very simple but difficult principle to live. No situation can really break your peace. Only you break it yourself. Like a river flowing around a rock, the still mind does not try to push back the obstacle, but simply drifts through it, envelops it, and then continues its journey. If we try to get rid of our cat, we'll only see more cats. But when we accept that the cat can pass through our hearts and remain silent, then we have found the door of inner freedom. People often ask, but how can you live in the middle of life without getting caught up? The answer lies in the very way that the monks learned from Tama. Stay in it and not fight it. When others are angry, observe that anger like a Tama bell. It rings, then dissolves. When anxiety comes, don't try to extinguish it. Just look at it, recognize it, and then go back to breathing. The mind is not a battlefield, it's the sky. The clouds may be black, they may be thick, but the sky has never been damaged. Eisen often reminds young students, if you meditate just to be alone, you'll never be still. But if you meditate to see what is making you restless, then at that moment you are at peace. And that is what Tama taught, not through words, not through theory, but by the pure presence of a living being in the present moment. In fact, if you look closely, this life always sends us Tama in many forms. A child cries when we are tired, a difficult colleague, a sudden rain in the middle of the road, an unexpected loss. It's all meditation, tests of whether we can stay in the present without being pushed away. And if we are aware enough, each such encounter deepens the root of our stillness. Today, in some monasteries, the story of the Shenji temple cat is still told as an illustration of the principle of non-resistance in Zen. Not to extinguish the noise, but to become bigger than the noise. It's not to dispel the turmoil, but to be quiet enough to embrace the whole turmoil. When you practice like this, one day you'll discover something strange. The world is still noisy, but you no longer need the quiet to be quiet. That's the moment when the mind becomes a real meditation hall, where everything has its place, even the sudden meow in the air. One moonlit night, Eisen sat under a cedar tree, remembering the countless times he had been angry with the cat in the past. He smiled and said softly, "You didn't come to disturb me. You came to save me." And in the gentle breeze, it is said, he heard a faint growl, or perhaps just the sound of his heart stopping anger. Tama's lesson is therefore not only for monks, but for anyone who is seeking peace in the midst of a chaotic life. Peace is not a reward, but a natural state of mind when it is no longer fighting the present. Just as the surface of a lake reflects the sky only when there are no ripples, our mind only reflects the truth when it stops reacting. And then the cat, or whatever symbolizes disturbance, will be just a cute part of the whole picture, not an enemy. Finally, when the student asked Eisen, "Teacher, how can I keep my mind at peace?" he laughed. "I can't keep it. Peace is not something to be held, but it is obvious when you stop holding on to everything else." Silence is not the reward for the perfect, but the nature of the person who has stopped striving to be perfect. And if one day, in the midst of the hustle and bustle of life, you hear a little meow in your heart, don't chase it. Smile, breathe deeply, and remember Tama, because perhaps you are standing right on the threshold of true peace. Happiness never decreases when shared. True abundance works mathematically differently than scarcity. In the light morning breeze, Ichiro stood watching the mules grazing leisurely, and in his heart, something quiet was moving. He realized that by giving half, he had nothing to lose. On the contrary, he felt enlarged. The burden on his shoulders was lighter, not only because the rice had run out, but also because an invisible burden in his heart had also disappeared. All his life, he has believed that success comes from holding steadfast, keeping credit, keeping goods, keeping promises. But today, he discovered a different kind of success, one that arises when we keep nothing to ourselves. That afternoon, when he arrived in the village, the poor people rushed out to meet him. They shouted, not just because of the sacks of rice, but because he had made it, which seemed impossible. An old woman holding his hand trembled. "We heard that there are robbers in the pass. We're afraid you'll never make it." Ichiro just smiled. He did not say that he had met them, that the same bandits were the sons, fathers, and husbands of the village. In the late sunlight shining on his tanned face, his eyes seemed to contain a secret that only those who had ever seen human naked compassion could understand. When he returned, his footsteps on the mountain road were no longer those of a merchant. It is the footsteps of a person who understands. Between loss and gain, between giving and receiving, there are no clear boundaries at all. Only a constant flow of life, where everything is given and received like breath. Sengai listened to the story when Ichiro returned, his face like a mirror without wavering. When he heard the passage of the robbers helping him deliver the goods, the Zen master laughed slightly, his eyes gleaming like dewdrops on bamboo leaves. "You see?" he said, "sometimes the way to get through the wall is not to try to break it, but to dissolve into it." Ichiro bowed his head. "I don't understand completely, sir." Sengai closed his eyes, as if speaking to the wind. "When you're afraid, you detach yourself from things. He wants to live, and the fear he wants to keep. But when he gives, even in fear, he returns to the natural flow of things. And in that flow, there is no longer you and others. There's just work to be done, and it gets it done on its own." There was silence for a long time. Only the sound of a murmuring stream outside was small. Sengai scooped water from the jar and poured it into 2 coarse ceramic cups. He handed a cup to Ichiro. "Drink it. This is last night's rainwater. It used to be clouds, it used to be dew, it used to be rivers. Now it's tea in a cup. When you give, you also become like water, nothing to lose, only to change shape." Ichiro took a sip of the tea, the slight bitterness and the aroma of young leaves spreading in his mouth. A tear quietly slid down. Perhaps they are not tears of sadness or joy, but the first tears of understanding. We often believe that security lies in holding on, money, status, relatives, or the idea of ourselves. But life is not a locked treasure. It's like a river. Only when water is allowed to flow, it's clear. If you hold, it becomes cloudy. If you let it go, it comes alive. Many people ask, if I keep giving, then what do I have left? The answer is, you are left with yourself. It's not the little self that's accumulating, it's the big you, the one who realizes that the hand of giving and the hand of receiving are actually the same hand of life. Look around you in everyday life. When you share a kind word, you don't lose anything. On the contrary, you become relieved. When you forgive someone, you don't get weaker. You just take the burden off of the past. When you help others get up, you don't bow low. You just open your heart to see that no one is really above or below. Generosity, in the spirit of meditation, is not just for material things. It is the softness of the mind, the ability to let life pass through you unhindered. Many people think of meditation as leaving the world, but meditation is really about seeing the world more clearly, with all-encompassing compassion. The meditator does not run away from life. He sees in every wind, every cry, every handshake, every smile, there is the Dharma manifesting. In an ancient monastery in Kyoto, there is an inscription on the gate, "A bowl of rice can save a life, but a selfish idea can kill a soul." It reminds us that the smallest action, if it arises from an open heart, can spread beyond all great plans. When Ichiro bowed his head to give the rice, he didn't think he was doing something great. He just does what needs to be done. And it is in that simple doing that he touches on a deeper layer of existence, where every action becomes a ritual, every encounter becomes a blessing. If you look back at the moments that changed your life, they probably didn't come from meticulous planning, but from a random minute of openness. You let go of the will to control, and suddenly the magic happens. Like a seed sprouting in a rock crevice, life doesn't need much, just a gap of trust. In Zen, it is called the mind as wide as nothing. When the mind is wide enough, every situation becomes an opportunity to awaken. Sengai once told his disciples, there are 3 ways to live a lifetime. One is to live to earn. The second is to live to protect. The third is to live to give. People who live to win are always afraid of losing. People who live to protect are always afraid of change. Only those who live to give are truly free. One of the disciples asked, "Teacher, how long will you have enough?" Sengai smiled. "When you no longer think you're giving." That is the spirit of selflessness of almsgiving. When the act of giving there is no giver, receiver. At that time, almsgiving becomes a natural expression of wisdom and compassion. Ichiro's story spread throughout the region, and many people who heard it changed the way they worked. Some people are starting to pay their employers more fairly. Someone forgives an old friend who betrayed him. Some people simply put an extra bowl of rice on the table, inviting passers-by to eat together. They all said that, strangely enough, they felt more relieved and prosperous afterwards, though no one knew why. Perhaps it was the math of abundance that the last teaching spoke of, the math that only the heart knows how to count. One afternoon, Ichiro returned to Sengai Sensei, this time not to ask, but to thank him. He bowed his head and said, "Master, I understand. But let me ask you one more thing. How do you keep an open mind when life begins to close again?" Sengai looks out over the field where the wildflowers are waving in the wind. When the door closes, remember that it was the wind that pushed it, he said. When your child's heart is closed, remember that it is the fear that wants to protect what you love. Then don't try to open the door. Just go back and see who's closing it. Ichiro was silent for a long time. He continued, the door of the center has no lock, only a handle, and it's always inside. If tonight, as you lie down after a long day, you feel an anxiety in your heart about money, about love, about something unfinished, you can try Ichiro's little exercise. Ask yourself, what can I give right now? It is not material giving, but it can be a forgiveness, a thank you, a breath of relief, a minute of release. When you do that, you will feel a small void open up in your chest. That space is the abundance you seek. Sengai used to say, don't wait for life to be pleasant to open your heart, because it is when you open your heart that life becomes pleasant. We can't always avoid loss, but we can choose to go through it with open hands instead of clenched grips. Remember that every wind wants to sing, but only if we don't cover our ears. Every human being wants to love, but only if we stop asking to be loved first. The story of the rice merchant ends, but meditation continues in each of us, in the most mundane moments. When you stop to hear someone else finish a sentence, when you share the best part of yourself, when you're not trying to prove yourself right. Each such action is a sack of rice that is given, and each robber in us, fears, selfishness, resistance, is gradually dissolved. And then you will understand why the old Zen masters used to smile without speaking. For the truth, once lived, there is no need for explanation. An inscription is inscribed on a wooden plaque in the temple of Sengai, where he taught his last student before his death. To give is to understand that nothing belongs to me. To keep it is to forget that it is all mine. Tonight, as you sit still, listening to your breath in the rhythm of the world, you'll probably remember Ichiro, the rice merchant who walked through the mountain pass not only with sacks of rice, but also with the seeds of a simple truth. When we give without asking for anything, we are the first to be liberated. When we give without asking for anything, we are the first to be liberated. However, few people realize that right away. The self used to whisper, "What about me? Who will take care of me?" That voice is not an enemy. It's the part of us that has never been loved enough, never seen that we are inherently full. Sengai once told his students, "Don't hate your ego. Look at it like a child trembling for fear of being left behind. When you open your heart to embrace it, it will soften. And when it subsides, compassion begins." Compassion is not something to be taught, nor is it a virtue to be attained. It's like an underground spring. As long as you remove the blocking stone, it will drain on its own. In the fall of that year, Ichiro returned to the village by the pass, taking some new rice seeds with him. He was no longer a merchant, but a friend. Children ran out to meet him, calling him Uncle Rice. Men who used to be shy bandits bowed their heads. Now they are back to farming and taking care of their families. Together, they planted the first crop with new seeds. And when the rice is ripe and golden on the hillside, the whole village holds a small festival. They invite Ichiro to stay, but he just laughs. "Keep this festival to yourself. I only bring seeds, and the field and the rain are heavens and earths." He left the village when the moon rose, looked back, and saw small torches flickering like flocks of fireflies flying in the night. Perhaps, he thinks, this is the real reward for every journey. To see the places he has passed light up, not because of the name, but because the hearts of people have been touched. In the ancient scriptures, the Buddha once told a story. A king gave away all his treasure to save the people during a famine. When the servant asked, "Isn't your majesty afraid of poverty?" he replied, "I'm just afraid that my heart will close." True poverty does not lie in empty pockets, but in depleted hearts. A person who is materially poor can still be rich if his mind knows how to share. A powerful rich person can still be poor if he is afraid of losing. In that light, Ichiro's story is not just a moral miracle, but a mirror that reflects on how we face our own deprivation. Every time you feel missing, you can try stopping and asking, what's missing? Short on money? Short on time? Lack of love? Or is it just a lack of one's own presence in the moment? You will realize that much of the deprivation does not come from the outside, but from our departure from the present, where, if we really look, there is always enough. Just like when drinking water, if you are busy thinking about tomorrow's glass of wine, you will not see the sweetness in today's drops of water. Once, a young student asked Sengai, "Teacher, how can you live in the world and keep your mind meditative? I have to compete. I have to make money. I have to take care of my family. I feel like I'm being pulled to two sides." Sengai smiled and said, "Did you see the mother breastfeeding? She both gave and received back. Give milk, receive love in return. There is no contradiction at all. When you work with a servant mind, the work becomes meditation. When you live with a heart of gratitude, the world becomes an ashram." That answer made the boy silent for a long time, because sometimes we don't need to give up on life. We just need to change the way we touch it. Years later, when Ichiro was old, he continued to sell rice, but it was said that he was different. He was no longer in a hurry to calculate, no longer afraid of loss. He often helped the poor to afford, and strangely enough, he never lost. A friend asked him, "Why aren't you worried that people will take advantage of your kindness?" Ichiro replied, his voice calm, "If they need rice so much that they have to lie, then maybe what they need is more than just rice." The friend was silent. In Ichiro's eyes, there was a kind of peace that could not be bought. A peace that came only when people stopped demanding that life be fair and began to live as if everything were a gift. His story spread as far as the capital, and one day a young official came to visit, wanting to learn the Tao. He asked Sengai, "Zen master, I heard that giving is the path to enlightenment. But if everyone gives, who will keep the world running?" Sengai laughed, pointing to the burning oil lamp on the table. "You see, the fire gives light, but that's why it continues to exist. If it keeps the light on, it will turn off. People who know how to give don't stop the world. They keep it going." In modern life, we may not have to face bandits in the mountains, but we still encounter other bandits. Rushed deadlines, judgments, pressures that make us defensive. I erect barriers around me, not with stones, but with doubt. Each time, remember Ichiro bowing his head in the middle of the pass. Try offering half a sack of rice, maybe a smile, a minute of listening, a yield. Not because I'm weak, but because that's how I step out of the wall. When the heart opens, the wall dissolves itself. There is a paradox of meditation. When you stop looking for happiness, happiness comes. When you stop trying to love, love spreads. When you stop protecting yourself, life begins to shield you. It's as if the universe is just waiting for you to relax so that it can embrace you. One afternoon at the end of his life, Ichiro sat on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The old mules were set free, and the sound of temple bells echoed from afar. He remembered his first day on the pass, his fear, his hesitation, and the moment he bowed to the hungry marauders. Now, he understands that he never delivers rice. He's just learning how to surrender his ego. And each time he let go, he was a little lighter. When his last breath came, he was said to be smiling. On his lips, there was still a quote that Sengai often reminded: "Everything I keep, I will lose. Everything I give, I will take it with me." The story of the rice merchant has faded over the years, but its seeds continue to germinate in the hearts of those who hear it. Because every age has its own mountain pass, and every human being has the opportunity to try it. Can we bow our heads, open our hearts, and give half of ourselves, even just half a minute of peace, to this world? If you are quiet tonight, looking back on the day that has passed, you will see everything you give, a piece of attention, a kind word, a small action, is quietly coming back somehow in a different form. It could be a feeling of peace in your heart, a stranger smiling at you, or simply a deep sleep without dreams. Life is an endless stream of exchange. Nothing is lost, just change hands. And when you understand that, you'll see every trip, every impossible delivery, every challenge are just avenues for you to learn to give and receive at the same time, to learn to see yourself in it all. Someone asked the Zen master at the end of his life, "Master, what have you learned after a lifetime of meditation?" He replied, "Only two things: letting go and loving." Letting go is not giving up, but no longer being tied to the outcome. Love is not holding, but seeing the unity of all beings. If you can live each day with those two words, you have completed a great round of meditation. And so tonight, as you breathe in, think of all that you have received. As you exhale, think of all you can give. Between those two breaths, there is no boundary. There is only life, continuing to give and continuing to receive forever. One night, after that fateful sermon, the entire Daikoji monastery was still asleep. The news of Mon's enlightenment spread like the wind through the pine trees. The monks sat in the courtyard, whispering and discussing. Some people are confused, some are jealous, some are suspicious. How can a person who does not understand the basic chant be called enlightened? How does a person who forgets to learn become a scene? An old monk, after many years of silence, only said softly, "When you're no longer looking, the path opens itself. When you're no longer trying, the hand holds itself." No one answered, but the night wind seemed to understand. It blew through the old tiled roof, through the brown coats hanging on the veranda, like the remnants of the laughter of the afternoon teacher. The next morning, Mon woke up early as usual. He didn't look like anything else, still cleaning the yard, washing the dishes, carrying the water. If anything changed, it was the light in his eyes, quiet, clear, and as open as an autumn lake. When he was asked how he felt, he just laughed. "I don't know." Not the "I don't know" type of confusion, but a free-flowing "don't know," as if every question asked was a blooming flower needing no picking. From there, other students began to draw closer to him, not to ask him about the doctrine, but just to sit still with him. They say that just by being close to Mon, their minds naturally slow down. Thoughts like smoke dissipate, leaving behind a clear atmosphere of pure presence. One afternoon, as his teacher passed by, he stopped to look at the scene and smiled. Sometimes, the deepest sermon is not in words, but in the stillness of the listener. As time passed, Mon was assigned to look after the vegetable garden behind the temple. That garden used to be arid, but since he took care of it, vegetables have grown green and flowers bloom all year round. A student asked for the secret, and Mon replied, "I only pull the grass when I see the grass, water it when the soil is thirsty. I'm not trying to make the garden beautiful, I'm just helping it come back to itself." That simple answer becomes a living metaphor for Zen. Because in fact, the human heart is like the land. When we try to make it better, we inadvertently stir up earthquakes, break roots and flowers. When we simply take care of it and observe, it repairs itself. The practice, therefore, is not about forcing ourselves to become someone else, but about returning to what we are. One day, a young student came to Mon, his face full of anxiety. "Brother, I have been meditating for 3 years and my mind is still in turmoil. I try to stay mindful, but the more I try, the more I fail. What should I do?" Mon was silent for a long time, then asked, "Do you see the wind?" "You see." "Did you catch him?" "It's impossible, brother." "Then why do you want to catch your heart?" The student was puzzled. Mon smiled. "Just open the door and the wind will come in by itself. Just let go and the mind will calm itself." Those words echoed in the boy's heart for many years afterwards. And one day, while washing dishes in silence, he suddenly understood. Meditation is not in sitting meditation, but in washing a bowl with all presence. It is often thought that enlightenment is the pinnacle of understanding, but in reality, it is the deep bottom of renunciation. Not to know more, but to reduce what you don't need to know. One winter, the snow covered Daikoji with thick snow. The whole monastery fell silent. In the cold meditation hall, Moan's teacher lit a candle and asked, "Moan, you have searched for the mind for 3 years and have not found it. Where is the mind now?" Moan looked at the fire for a long time and then replied, "I don't know, sir." "And do you suffer because you don't know?" Moan smiled and bowed his head. "No, sir. I feel free in ignorance." The teacher nodded. The light of the candle reflected in his eyes like two still lakes. "Then you know enough." In the years that followed, Moan became the one tasked with instructing the new progenitors. But unlike other teachers, he doesn't preach much. He only asks his students to experience with their bodies. When you drink water, actually drink. When you hear a bell, don't just think it's a bell. Let it ring in your whole body. When you are sad, let your sadness be complete, like the sound of rain falling on a roof. A student asked, "So what is meditation?" Moan replied, "It's when you're no longer looking for meditation." The answer spread far and wide, and some people came to Daikoji from afar, hoping to listen to the Tao. A prominent scholar who has written many books on Zen asked Moan. He said, "Not knowing is wisdom, but isn't knowledge also light?" Moan replied lightly, "The light of the sun shines everywhere, but when I take the lamp with me, I no longer see the sun." The scholar was silent. He realized that the lamp of knowledge is sometimes an obstacle that prevents us from seeing the light shining around us. One day, a child in the village got lost in the pagoda. He saw Moan sweeping the leaves and asked, "Uncle, what are you doing?" Moan said, "I'm learning how to sweep leaves." "But I'm done scanning." "Yes, but the wind is still blowing. So I learned to scan not only the leaves, but also the will." The child chuckled, "Then you'll never be done." Moan also laughed. "That's right, but while you're not done, you're still alive." The baby didn't understand everything, but felt unusually warm. One spring morning, Moan's teacher passed away in silence. In his final remarks, he wrote, "Don't teach people to understand. Teach them to live. Don't show them the way. Make them walk." Moan kept the piece of paper for the rest of his life. Every time someone came to ask for the truth, he just gave them that paper. Once, a young monk asked him, "Brother, if you don't teach me to understand, how can I become enlightened?" Moan smiled. "Did you hear the birds singing this morning?" "Yes, brother." "Then I don't need to say anything more." Years later, when Moan had become a master, he was asked about the secrets of the practice. He replied, "When I'm stupid, I try to understand. When I understood, I went back to being a fool. Because only when I am stupid can I hear, see, and love completely." The disciples bowed their heads. Some people shed tears without knowing why. Moan's story spread throughout the region like a wordless scripture. It's been told over and over again for generations. But strangely, each listener understands it differently. The intellectual hears and says, "This is the philosophy of the self and the mind." The farmer listened and said, "This is the story of an honest man who is loved by the heavens." The practitioner hears and says, "This is the lesson of letting go." And it's all true, because the truth is not in the narration, but in the listener. A contemporary Zen master once commented on Moan, "Students who forget to study have taught us that intelligence is not the unlocker of enlightenment. It's simplicity, honesty, willingness to admit I don't know that is the key. Because I don't know is not the end of knowledge, but the door to something deeper than knowledge. When we dare to say, I don't know, we open up the space for the mystery to enter. And in that void, no teacher, no pupil, no concept, there is only life that reveals itself." So, when you look back at yourself tonight, amidst the unknown, the unanswered questions, the unfinished plans, don't be afraid to don't know. Let the unknown become a good friend. Let not knowing keep you soft, humble, open. Because as the great Master Dojin once said, when we really learn the way, we learn ourselves. When we learn ourselves, we forget ourselves. When I forget myself, I am illuminated by all things. Ignorance is not ignorance. It is vastness before all understanding. It is the sky that has not been covered by prejudice. It is open ground in which the seeds of wisdom can germinate. When we live with the unknown mind, every moment becomes an opportunity to see again for the first time. A flower is not just a flower, but a blooming miracle. A stranger is not just the other, but a mirror of ourselves. A breath is not just breathing in, exhaling, but full life that is taking place. And then, as the circle returns to the starting point, we realize giving and not knowing are the same thing. Because when we give, we no longer hold on, and when we don't hold, we don't know who we are, other than the life that is flowing through. Giving is the act of not knowing. Not knowing is the state of giving. A person who is truly giving does not know that he is giving, and the recipient does not know that he is receiving. There is only flow, like rain falling, like light spreading, like nameless compassion. So when we share attention, it multiplies. When we offer kindness, it comes back, exaggerated. When we give trust, it creates trustworthiness. Because in the depths of every relationship, there is no giver, no receiver. Only life is giving itself. And perhaps that is the simplest of enlightenments. Not to learn more, not to gain anything, but just to become the path through which everything passes, without hindrance, without retention, without identification. When you sit still for the night, try dropping down all the questions. Don't try to meditate, don't try to understand, don't try to get better. Just be present, like Moan, sitting in the middle of the class, raising his hand and saying, I don't know. And at that moment, maybe the light of the lamp will shine through the gap of your mind, gently, naturally, for no reason at all. When we share attention, it multiplies. When we offer kindness, it is again magnified. When we give trust, it creates trustworthiness. Tonight, as you consider the seemingly impossible in your own life, situations where you feel trapped in the midst of competing demands, where resources don't seem to be enough for what is needed, you may wonder, what gift can transform this dynamic? Instead of focusing on what you're lacking, what can you offer? Instead of protecting what you have, how can you share it in a way that creates new possibilities? As the Buddha said, give even if you have little. Sometimes the smallest gifts, made with sincere care, open doors that all of our clever strategies can never open. And now, let's move on to a story about the paradox of ignorance and true understanding. Daikoji Monastery, where wisdom is tested by simplicity. On the mountainside where the fog usually descends, among the ancient yew trees whispering in the wind, there is a monastery called Daikoji. Here, time seems to slow down. The sound of the knock, the sound of the wind, the sound of water droplets from the old eaves. It all blended into one, as if the world was no longer divided. Young monks come here from all over the world with a desire to understand the profound teachings of Zen. They want to be enlightened. They want to touch the essence of the Buddha's mind. Something they hear cannot be said in words, but everyone wants to know. Among them was a man named Moan. He is not outstanding, nor is he particularly weak in appearance. But after a short time, everyone realized that Moan was different. He didn't seem to understand anything. As his fellow students recited the sutras for just a few weeks, debating the Zen paradoxes sharply, Mon was still confused between the first and last verses. When they talked about the immortal mind, Mon could only sit still, listen, sometimes scratch his head, sometimes look out the window, where the clouds were flying through the pines. 3 years on, Mon didn't make much progress. The others gradually avoided talking to him. They whispered, "He's so stupid. He's been here longer than anybody, and he can't even recite a basic prayer." Others pitied. "Maybe he has no basis. He should just leave the temple and live a normal life." However, the abbot, Zen Master Eisen, never scolded Mon. He just smiled, sometimes nodding at him with eyes like a child trying to lift a stone that was too heavy. But there was something precious in that effort. "Keep going," he said simply. "Every drop of rain finds its way into the sea." Unanswerable questions. One afternoon, in a quiet lecture hall, Zen Master Eisen gave a lecture on the Buddha mind, the immortal and immortal essence to which all the teachings point. His Holiness spoke of the difference between the ordinary mind and the enlightened mind. The knowledge of the intellect is only a reflection. The knowledge of enlightenment is that the surface of the lake has no waves. The students listened nervously, sweating profusely, and their eyes lit up because of their efforts to understand. Everyone wants to grasp what he is saying. In the midst of this concentration, Mon suddenly raised his hand. The whole room was silent. He rarely spoke up. His voice was slow and honest. "Teacher, I don't understand what the Buddha's mind is. I have listened to you for many years, read sutras, asked friends, but I still don't know where that mind is. I searched in my head, in my chest, in my breath, without seeing it. Did you do something wrong?" A stream of silence spread out. The sound of the wind outside is more audible. Zen Master Eisen looked at Mon for a long time. His eyes gradually brightened, and then he laughed. A resounding laugh, filled like spring water overflowing through a rock. The students were dumbfounded. Some people think the teacher is mocking. Some people are afraid. But Eisen laughed so much that tears fell, and then said, "Ah, Mon, you're stupid, but you're a miraculous fool. You have searched the mind everywhere without finding it, because you are the mind. While others are loaded with notions of enlightenment, you only live in pure ignorance itself. And that's enlightenment." He turned to the others. "You learn about the moon through your fingers." And Mon, he forgot his fingers, so he saw the moon. No one could say a word. Some people quietly shed tears. Some people still don't understand, but there is a strange silence in their hearts, as if they have just caught a glimpse of something beyond language, the source of the unknown. Since that day, Mon hasn't changed much. He still swept the yard, still cooked rice, and still bowed to everyone. The only difference is that when people ask, "What do you think of the Buddha's mind?" he just smiles. I don't know. But that answer no longer seems stupid. It was as light as the wind, as real as water, as full as space. One day, Eisen asked Mon as they were walking around the lake together, "When you say you don't know, do you really don't know?" Mon replied, "Master, if you tell me, I will lie. If you say you know, you've already thought about it. So I'm just hear the sound of water." Eisen was silent. The sunset fell on the surface of the lake, reflecting his old face, which was smiling. Learning and forgetting to learn. In religious life, there are two types of people: those who accumulate knowledge and those who let go of knowledge. The former was like adding water to an already full jug, spilling out, wetting his shirt without drinking a drop. The latter is like putting the jar down by the stream. The water flows in on its own. Zen teaches that true understanding does not come from knowing more, but from seeing more clearly. Seeing without an observer, understanding without an understander. Moan did not achieve it by intellect, but by exhaustion of intellect. He had gone all the way to the limit of trying to understand, and there it all collapsed. Only silence remained. In that silence, there is a wordless knowledge. That knowledge does not distinguish between us and scenery, does not measure, does not reflect. It is the Buddha's mind, but not as a concept. Story within story. Years later, it is said that Moan became Daikoji's next abbot. But in his lectures, he never talked about enlightenment. He told only very small stories: a falling leaf, a sleeping cat, the sound of last night's rain. When someone asks, "Master, how can I attain enlightenment like you?" Moan laughed. "When I stopped trying, it was already there." Someone asked, "So what is meditation?" He replied, "It is sitting when sitting, eating when eating, sleeping when sleeping. When you think you're meditating, it's just thinking." A young student reacted, "But that's too simple." Moan looked at him. His eyes were gentle. "Yes. And it's because it's so simple that your complex mind can't be believed." Moonlight shining on still water. Once, on a moonlit night, a young monk saw Moan sitting by the lake, looking down at the water. He asked, "Are you meditating?" Moan didn't answer. After a while, he said, "I'm looking at the moon in the water." Crouched growth. But the moon in the water is not the real moon. Moan smiled. And the water in the moon is not real water. When the mind is still, the moon and water are one. That answer rang like a bell, not just in the night, but in the hearts of the listeners for years afterwards. Meditation in everyday life. Once a traveler asked Moan, "I can't cultivate at the temple. I live in the middle of the streets, bustling, noisy. How do you find tranquility?" Moan pointed to the ground with his hand. "Can you hear my footsteps?" "Yes, sir." Then the silence is already there. Silence is not without sound. Silence is that there is no one against the sound. The traveler folded his hands. From then on, every time in the middle of the street, he just listened to his footsteps and felt his mind lighten. The unknown, the door to everything. Moan's ignorance is not ignorance, but an unresisting emptiness. It's like the sky. It doesn't hold back the clouds. It doesn't push the clouds away. As a result, there is always room for light to shine through. In life, we always want to know the plan, know the results, know who is right and who is wrong. But it is this need to know that makes us no longer see. A person wants to grasp the water with their hands. The water will drift away. One person pointed out his hand to catch it. The water flowed in on its own. When Moan said, "I don't know where the Buddha's mind is," it was then that he became pure knowing. Not the knowledge of what, but the very power of knowing that is alive. Knowing and seeing. One morning, when the dew was still on the grass, Eisen asked Moan, "If no one knows, then who's seeing?" Moan replied, "I don't know, but I see it's still here." Eisen laughed. "Good. Don't ever know, because I know I forgot to see it." He closed his eyes, folded his hands, and whispered, "When you see and know unity, it is absolute silence. When there is only one to see, there is no one to see. It is the Buddha." Opening, a lesson for listeners. The story of Moan is not to celebrate stupidity, but to remind us that enlightenment is not the result of effort, but a return to what is already there. You cannot know the truth because you are that truth. When the mind stops fighting, it stops trying to understand, it stops measuring, everything goes back to its original form, clear, simple, nameless. Like the surface of the water does not try to reflect, but always reflects completely. Final thoughts. Moan's lesson. On the last night before his death, Moan said to his disciples, "When I die, don't make a stele, don't engrave words. The wind will do it." The student asked, "What last word do you want to leave for us?" Moan looked out the window, where the moon had just risen, and said very quietly, "Don't forget to smile." He closed his eyes. Outside, the wind shook the pines gently, as if laughing. And if tonight you're still looking for something, meaning, peace, or answers, remember Moan. Sit still. Don't understand. Don't change. Just be present. Because when you don't try to find anymore, it's all here. On the misty mountainsides of ancient Kyoto, the story of a man who left everything behind in search of wisdom is still being told. He lived in a low valley, in the midst of a life full of calculations and suffering. For years, he has been torn apart by an unsolvable problem, a deep concern about himself, like a thorn in his mind that all advice, every ritual, all knowledge cannot pull out. He looked to the elders of the village, to the wise men, even to the monks of distant temples, but no one gave him the clarity he craved. Then one day, it was told of a saint who lived in a hermit on the top of a mountain, living in a simple house among the pine forest and white clouds, who could clearly see his heart as if reflecting on the surface of a still lake. Hearing that, he knew that he had to set out, no matter how long and dangerous the road was. The road up the mountain is bumpy. The roots of trees stretch out like small snakes, and the mountain rocks are sharp and slippery. He climbed step by step, his breathing getting worse and worse in the thin air. The sun skewered through the leaf layer, making the light seem to flow into a thread in the middle of the forest. The higher you go, the less the sound of the birds, only the sound of your heart, and the sound of pebbles rolling under your heels. At one point, he wanted to go back, but a vague thought that, up there, maybe it's where my soul finds peace, made him move on. When the water in the bamboo tube was empty, his clothes were soaked with sweat, and his feet were bleeding, he saw the small wooden house on the top of the mountain. It was very modest. The roof was made of thatched grass. The blue smoke was thin. There were no signs, no big gates. It was all so simple that he felt his heart sag, as if he had come close to something real. He walked to the door, his heart pounding. In his mind, he imagined a sage with deep eyes, gray hair, and a voice that echoed like a temple bell. When he knocked on the door opened and revealed an old man dressed in a coarse cloth shirt with a gentle but normal expression like many other farmers. "I want to see the saint," he said, his voice full of respect. The servant smiled and replied softly, "Please come in." He followed him through the simple house, the light shining through the wooden crevice on the old objects, a teacup, a mat, an earthen jug. With each room he passed, he looked around, hoping to see traces of the saint, an ancient sutra, a Buddha statue, or at least some sacred aura. But no, everything is strangely idyllic. They went through the main hall, the kitchen, the meditation room, and finally stopped at the back door. The servant opened the door and pointed to the steep path leading down the mountain. He was stunned, not understanding what was happening. "Wait," he said, his voice lost in frustration. "I didn't come here to pass by an empty house. I want to see the saint." The servant looked at him, his eyes seemingly reflecting both sympathy and slight joy. "You've met," he said quietly, "and you have a lesson for you." The man frowned, looking closely at the servant. an old man with calloused hands, a slightly cuffed back, and a face as gentle as earth. "What teaching?" he asked, unable to hide his suspicion. The servant replied, "In life, anyone you meet, no matter how insignificant they may seem, look at them as a saint. If you can do that, all your problems will be solved." The man stood still, his heart wavering. He climbed a mountain, exhausted, expecting a mysterious secret, and in return received only an absurdly simple teaching. He wanted to retort, but when he looked deeply into the servant's eyes, he saw there a peaceful light that he had never seen in anyone. He didn't say anything more, just bowed his head, and then walked quietly down the mountain. The afternoon wind blew through the pines, the sound of bells echoed in the distance, and for a moment he suddenly realized, perhaps precisely because he had never seen holiness in ordinary things, that he had always sought it far away. Ancient Zen masters used to recount the story, then remain silent for a long time, so that the listener can listen to its own echoes in their hearts. Because the man's vision is what most of us see, the eye for the extraordinary, and forget that the divine is always in front of us. On another occasion, in a bustling city where scholars debated in tea houses and merchants bargained in the market, Zen Master Bankai was about to leave the temple where he had just finished his lecture. He packed up some belongings and was about to leave for another place to meet the students who were waiting. At that time, a well-dressed man with an aristocratic appearance came and bowed deeply. "Master, I come on behalf of the Baron. He was looking forward to seeing him, but he couldn't come because of work. Can you stay one more day to give him instructions?" Bankai smiled slightly and said, "I will stay." That night he sat in silence. The moonlight falling on the old brick yard, the sound of crickets ringing for a long time. He didn't think about the nobleman, just breathed in his inherent peace. The next morning, when the sun had just risen, the man from the previous day came again, this time with a confused look. "The Baron is sorry," he said. "Urgent work makes it impossible for him to come. But he sent me to receive instruction on his behalf. He wanted to ask about the nature of the mind, what it really is, and how it could be recognized directly. I will remember every word he says and bring it back intact." Bankai looked at the person silently and did not speak. He was as silent as a stone, only the wind shook the hem of his shirt slightly. After a long time, he said, "The problem of Zen, even if the teacher and the student sit directly opposite each other, is still difficult to communicate. Through a messenger, it can't be." He finished speaking and was silent. The messenger stood there, waiting, but Bankai just kept silent. Finally, he bowed his head, withdrew, and brought the silence back to his master. No one knows if the Baron understood anything, but Bankai's later disciples said that the silence that day resounded far beyond any sermon, because words cannot convey a direct view of the mind. Just as the moonlight can't be wrapped in your hand, or the fragrance of flowers can't be sent by mail. The mind can only be realized when we look at it ourselves, without any intermediary. Ancient Zen storytellers often put these two anecdotes together. They say that the climber who seeks the saint and the nobleman who wants to learn through the messenger are actually just two forms of the same mind. One seeks the divine far away, the other wants to understand the truth without entering it. They both seek an other, a teacher, an answer, an external form, forgetting that what they are looking for is already within themselves. The saint on the mountain said, "Look at everyone as a saint." Bankai said in silence, No one can give you a view of the mind. The two teachings, which sound different, but the same thing, wisdom, is nowhere but what we see right now. When the story is over, the Zen master often closes his eyes and says quietly, "If anyone comes to ask about the path today, I will just look at them silently as Bankai did. And if they go looking for the saint, I will say that the saint is here, in every breath, in every living face." Then he poured the tea and placed the cup in front of the audience. In the aroma of hot tea, all the words dissolved into the steam, leaving only silence. There was no one to seek. There was no one to teach. There was only a quiet morning and the sound of leaves falling softly on the temple grounds. We read books about meditation instead of meditation. We study descriptions of enlightenment instead of looking deeply at the experience itself that is happening in us. We seek answers about the nature of the mind instead of looking directly at what we call the mind. At this very moment, Zen Master Dogen taught, to learn Buddhism is to learn yourself, and to learn yourself is to forget yourself. This paradox is not a tangled metaphor of philosophy, but a door that opens to the heart of Zen. It points to why true spiritual communication cannot come through knowledge or words, but can only arise in direct participation. The ego wants to understand Buddhism. It is the wall between us and the Buddha. The understanding it seeks to gain is something that needs to be seen thoroughly. This view does not come from gathering more knowledge, but from returning to a deep investigation of our own direct experience. The breath, the touch, the thoughts, the silence, and even the subtle movements of the mind. The messenger in the story of Bankai is the image of that eternal tendency in us to approach awakening through an indirect way. We want to understand consciousness as an object, keep a safe distance, and maintain the illusion that we are separate observers studying something called mind. But consciousness is not an object to be studied. It is the very knowing life. Awareness is not something we have. It is what we are. It is impossible to possess it, not to understand it, nor to transmit it, because every person, every being, every breath is an instantaneous manifestation of it. When Bankai answered the messenger, he did not give a long lecture, did not argue, did not impart a secret. His silence was the deepest lecture. In Zen, silence often conveys something that words can never touch. Between two streams of thought, between two breaths, there is an infinite space. It is in that space that all phenomena arise and dissipate. That space cannot be captured conceptually, but it can be recognized directly when we stop trying to grasp it. Bankai's silence, therefore, is not the absence of words, but the voice of nature, where all that is needed to know is already present. This does not mean that spiritual teaching is useless, or that teachers and students no longer have a role. Authentic teaching, on the other hand, points learners back to their own direct experience, rather than giving them an alternative description. The teacher does not give enlightenment. The teacher points out where the student has forgotten, the place where enlightenment is inherently present. As you are reading these words, pause for a moment. Feel your own presence. Feel the body sitting, the eyes reading, the breath coming in and out, the space that surrounds it in which all thoughts and sensations come and go. Can you simply stay with this awareness? No concept of I'm aware, just pure awareness? That is the beginning of Zen. The Buddha once said, light a torch yourself. No one can walk for you. No one can breathe for you. No one can live or become enlightened for you. The path to freedom cannot be taken by the agent. It takes your own feet, your breath, and the courage to look straight into what you've always been, but forgotten to see clearly. And when the learner is ready, Zen tells another story, the story of the leader who wants to be cut off. In Chao Chu's grand monastery, where hundreds of monks gather every day to meditate and study the Dharma, life flows in an ancient rhythm. Before dawn, when the sky was still foggy and the first light had just reached the top of the mountain, the sound of the bell rang out, opening the morning meditation. After that, each person scattered to do his or her part. The one who went to the garden, the one who went to the kitchen, the one who copied the sutras, the one who swept the yard, the one who repaired the meditation hall. Chao Zhou, the expert abbot, walked through the monastery grounds as usual. His figure was slow, his eyes were clear, and every step seemed to melt into the early wind. For his disciples, just one of his simple words can become a lecture, and sometimes a silent look is enough to make people awake. That morning, as he passed by the back of the main meditation hall, the wooden building where the monks sat silently twice a day, Chao Chu came across a young monk who was sitting alone in the dark, not engaged in public affairs. He paused, looked at the young disciple, and then asked in a calm voice, "Friend, where have the virtuous people gone?" His voice was as light as the breeze, but there was an unfathomable depth hidden in that question. It's not a common question. Longtime Zen practitioners know that, for Chao Chu, any word can be an open door. The young monk, who seemed to understand what he meant, replied at once, "They have all gone to work, sir." His voice was stern and confident. In his heart, he thought he had answered correctly. Virtuous people must act, must work, not just sit still. But as soon as the answer ended, Mr. Chao Chu suddenly reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small knife, and his tongue lit up in the morning sun. Without trembling, he put his neck in front of the blade and handed the knife to his disciple. "My responsibility is too heavy. Please help me. Cut off my head." His voice was gentle, as if he was saying the most reasonable thing in the world. The young monk was stunned, his hands trembled, and his eyes widened in horror. All the knowledge, all the Dharma he had ever learned, all the rules, all the morals suddenly collapsed. He didn't understand why he said that and what it meant. In a panic, he dropped the knife and ran away, his heart pounding, his mind in chaos. Cao Zhou calmly picked up the knife, put it in his sleeve, and continued walking, his face still like unrippled lake water. It is said that day, when full light descended into the valley, some people saw him look up at the clouds, smile softly, and continue his journey as if nothing had happened. Later, when the meditators asked about the meaning of that action, he simply replied, "When the burden becomes the self itself, sometimes compassion dares to cut it off." That word echoed through the centuries. Because the story is not just about the teacher and disciple in a monastery, but about ourselves. Every time we cling to the image of the practitioner, enlightened person, good person, or whatever face of the me we believe to be us. Meditation does not kill people, but kills illusions. Do not cut off the head with a knife, but cut off the boundary between the person and the action. Because in the moment it was really clear, the chopper, the head, and the knife all melted into one. Silent. In an ancient monastery on the slopes of Lingshan Mountain, there was a young monk named Rio. From the age of 16, he went to the temple, studied sutras, recited vows, and meditated every day under the guidance of the abbot, an old monk who was nearly 100 years old, known as Zen Master Daichi. It is said that Daichi once wandered all over the East, met many masters, realized and returned to the mountains to live in silence. But Ryo only knew him through brief lectures. Few words, deep ideas, often ending in silence that left the disciples bewildered. One morning in early winter, the fog was so thick that it seemed as if the whole temple had been swallowed up by white clouds. Ryo was sweeping the yard when he saw a stranger climbing up a rocky slope. He was thin, pale-faced, and clutched a stick in his hand. As he approached, he realized it was a beggar. The beggar bowed his head. "Have mercy, master. I haven't eaten for 3 days." Ryo frowned. "In the kitchen warehouse, there is only a small amount of rice. The capital for them is increased," he said quietly, his voice trembling with fear. I have no right to anyone. Please wait, I will tell the abbot." He hurriedly ran to Zen Master Daichi's ammunition. The old monk was sitting by the kitchen, slowly blowing the teapot. Ryo told him what he had just seen, hoping that he would allow him to take some leftover rice to save people. But Daichi only nodded slightly and said softly, "Good. Give my head to him." Ryo was dumbfounded. "I thought I heard it wrong. Teacher? People's ideas? What is it?" Daichi looked out where the white mist floated like smoke. He was hungry. "The only thing I can offer is this body. If my head can quench his hunger, it is also a good deed." Ryo panicked. He bowed, then hurriedly ran away, his heart pounding. In his heart, the teachings about compassion, selflessness, and the bodhisattva behavior he had learned suddenly became abstract to meaninglessness. He hid in the forest behind the pagoda, sitting breathing under the old pine canopy, both terrified and embarrassed. They say the abbot is enlightened, he thought. But that said, isn't that crazy? Who would give his head to a beggar? Ryo sat all afternoon, her heart as confused as silk. When he returned, the beggar was gone. Daichi was still sitting by the kitchen, as if nothing had happened. Later, every time she recalls, Ryo still doesn't understand what happened. He thought he was right. Keep the precepts, preserve the teacher's life, avoid madness. But deep down, an insecurity smoldered like a fire in the ashes. Years later, Ryo left the mountain. He traveled everywhere, teaching people the Dharma, becoming a respected monk. He was called Mr. Ryo the Great. He talks about emptiness, about love, about wisdom and liberation. But every time night falls, in the quiet of the room, the image of the old Daichi by the teapot appears, saying, "Give my head to him." That sentence was like an invisible blade, cutting through all the knowledge he had ever been proud of. One day, hearing that there was a famous Zen master in the south, known as Bankai, Ryo decided to visit. He hopes to find a solution to his lifelong concern. Bankai's monastery is small and simple, with no golden walls and tiled roofs, just huts scattered around a bamboo garden. When Ryo arrives, Bankai is helping a child pick up firewood. Ryo folded his hands and bowed, and then said, "Zen master, I have been studying the Tao for 40 years, teaching everywhere, but there is still something I don't understand in my heart. Please show me what is true compassion." Bankai smiled and handed him a bundle of firewood. "Bring it into the house to help me first." Ryo was a little surprised but complied. As he bent down to make the fire, Bankai asked softly, "Have you ever met a hungry man?" "Yes, a lot." "What did you do then?" "I taught them about karma, about how to practice to get rid of suffering." Bankai looked at him for a long time, his eyes both gentle and penetrating. "And their stomachs? Are they full?" Ryo was silent. In an instant, the image of the beggar of old came back clearly, his eyes sunken deeply, his trembling hands sticking out. Bankai smiled softly and said, When a person is in suffering, I can't save them with words. Compassion is not in the mouth, but in selfless action. Rio bowed his head, his voice hoarse. But what if it is contrary to the precepts, with what is taught to be right? When the mind no longer divides right and wrong, when there is no longer I to hold, compassion knows what to do. Saying that, Bankai pointed to the veranda, where the rain was falling lightly. Look, rain chooses no one. It falls on the lotus flower as well as the mud. The same is true of compassion. It doesn't think, doesn't choose, just flows. Ryo suddenly felt her heart tremble. For many years, he only knew how to talk about water, but never let water flow through his hands. After that session, Rio asked to stay at the monastery. He works with young monks, grows vegetables, carries water, and sweeps the yard. No one realized that this was a great intellectual who had been invited by the king to teach the Dharma. One day, an imperial messenger came to look for Bankai. They said the emperor wanted to meet to discuss doctrine. Bankai agreed. Rio followed as a servant. In the vast palace, the emperor sat on the throne, his face majestic but tired. After the greeting, he asked, "Venerable sir, I have been studying the Buddhist scriptures for many years. Please say, what is the highest truth?" The room fell silent. Bankai looked directly into the emperor's eyes. There was no fear, no dialogue in that gaze, just a round silence like the surface of a lake. Then he said, in a very low voice, "Immense emptiness without a trace of holiness." Everyone was amazed. The emperor frowned as if listening to the insult. "If there is no holiness, then who are you? What do you rely on to teach people?" Bankai replied, "I don't know." Those 3 words rang out like a bell in the middle of nowhere. The emperor was silent. In an instant, every word, every name, every concept of Buddhism collapses like dust. Rio stood behind him, his heart pounding. He suddenly understood. This is exactly what Daichi of old meant. Selfless action does not begin with knowledge or ethics, but from ignorance, where the mind is empty and clear. In that same ignorance, compassion naturally flows out, like spring water flowing from a mountain without a reason. After leaving the palace, Rio walked by Bankai's side in silence for a long time. Finally, he said, "Master, I think I understand. Compassion is not giving, but not withholding anything." Bankai smiled. "If you say, 'I understand,' I don't understand. But if you see that there is nothing to understand, then you are very close." Rio lowered his head, tears falling down his sleeves. In that moment, every verse, every theory he had ever taught disappeared, leaving only a deep, light breath as a cloud, the breath of ignorance. From that day on, Rio no longer preached the Dharma. He returned to the old temple where Daichi had long since passed away. In the small room, he sat by the old teapot, smiling and looking out at the courtyard, where the white mist was still covered as before. A beggar walks through the gate. Rio calls back, pouring him a cup of hot tea. The beggar drank and bowed his head in thanks. Rio only said, "Kettle not because of the tea, but because of the hand that is holding it." The wind shook the lamp gently, and in that moment, Rio saw it all. Hungry and full, teacher and student, giver and receiver, melting together like rain soaking into the ground. There is no holiness, there is no guilt, only this breath, quiet, unknown, and complete. In ancient Japan, when the era was still measured by the honor of a swordsman and the strength of loyalty, there was a general who was famous not only for his military prowess, but also for his vision beyond the confines of the battlefield. His name was Hosen, who was seen as a symbol of unwavering fighting spirit and clear intellect. But he himself, in a windy spring, faced the greatest test of his life, not from an external enemy, but from the fear that was simmering in the soldiers' hearts. As Hosen's army approached the Kamura plains, the news from the scouts made all hope seem dashed. The enemy was 5 times more numerous, occupying a high terrain, surrounded by rugged hills and deep rivers. Every tactic ever recorded in the book of martial arts says that this battle he will definitely lose. But the general did not believe in the predictions of fear. There was still a vague feeling in his heart, a deep belief that victory was still possible, that even if only as a faint glimmer of light. Maybe it's intuition, or maybe it's the desperate belief of someone who doesn't accept surrender. Whatever it was, he knew one thing. When the mind was bright, every path had a path. However, the soldiers under him were not like that. They also have eyes to see enemies as dense as a forest, and they also have the mind to calculate the fragile probability of survival. Fear spread like night mist seeping into the armor. Pessimistic whispers floated among the tents, predictions of death, of failure, of hopelessness. Hosen understood that an army that believed it had lost was actually already losing, even before the first drum sounded. There is no weapon more powerful than psychology, and there is nothing more cruel than self-doubt. He knew that in order to win, they had to first overcome that very fear. The next morning, when the dew was still on the roofs of the tents, the general ordered the whole army to stop by the road leading to the battlefield. On the side of the road, a small ancient temple sits hidden behind perennial cypress trees, the temple where generations of warriors have stopped to pray before going to battle. He led his troops into it, not to ask for victory, but to regain tranquility. In the thick smoke of incense, Hosen knelt down and made a soft vow. If our cause is right, let his heart be as pure as a shining sword. If death is fate, let us die in freedom, unbound by fear. Then he stood up and turned to the army. His eyes were as bright as forged steel, and his voice echoed through the silent space. Brother, we have prayed. Now let heaven and earth judge our destiny. He pulled out an old, simple bronze coin from his shirt that had worn out over the years. Raising it high, he said, "If the coin falls in the shape of a head, we will win. If it's a literal face, we'll lose. Let the will of heaven decide." The whole army was silent. The sound of the wind stopped. Hosen tosses the coin into the air. The coin swirled in the morning sun, reflecting the shimmering rays of light like a falling star. Time seemed to stand still until the coin fell to the ground, bounced once, and then lay still. The head side is facing up. A resounding roar spread throughout the field. The faces that were once gloomy are now shining. Fear disappeared, replaced by a burning fire in the eyes of each soldier. They believe that destiny has chosen them, and when people believe that heaven is on their side, they become invincible. The battle was intense. Hosen's soldiers, though much outnumbered, fought with spirit like waves overflowing the shore. They move as a single body, each as part of a common force. In cheers, they overcame both pain and blood. In the end, the unbelievable happened. The defeated enemy dispersed, fleeing the battlefield. When the afternoon sun went down, the Kamura fields were as red as the sunset fires. Hosen stood in the middle of the broken sword corpse, hearing chants of victory from his ranks. But he didn't laugh. In his eyes was a profound stillness, as he had foreseen this result long ago. A young lieutenant approached, his face beaming with joy. He said, "General, it's unbelievable. The coin told the truth. Fate is on our side. It's just as you said. No human power can change the will of heaven. Hosen smiled. He took out a coin from his shirt and showed it to the lieutenant. You're right. No one can change fate. The lieutenant turned the coin in his hand and was stunned. Both sides are all heads. He looked up, stammering. But, sir, then. The general laid his hand on his shoulder. His eyes were gentle. Fate is not on a coin. It's in the heart of the person who threw it. Saying that, he turned and looked towards the setting sun. In the golden light, the double-ended coin sparkles like a mysterious metaphor for human life. Later, as the story spread throughout the regions, there was a debate. Was the general a sage or a deceiver? But anyone who understands Zen knows that he doesn't deceive anyone. He's just awakening them from the illusion of failure. For the real enemy of man is not an external opponent, but the idea of surrender in his own mind. In the Buddhist teachings, it is said, everything we are is the result of what we thought. The mind is everything. What I think, I become. The belief of the soldiers that day was not a miracle, but the natural operation of the mind. When the mind trusts, the body is freed from fear. The energy, skill, and courage that were latent in them arose. Victory is not bestowed from heaven. It is awakened from within. The general understood that more deeply than anyone. He did not use trickery to deceive the soldiers, but only created conditions for true beliefs to emerge. That belief does not need a reason, just wholeheartedness. So, when the coin falls, it doesn't speak for heaven and earth. It only reflects the mind of the thrower. In Zen, there is a sentence. Fools deny what they see, not what they think. Intelligent people reject what they think, not what they see. Hosen was such a person. He looked straight at the obvious truth, that fear was killing his troops, and he chose to see it, not just think about it. He did not argue with reality. He worked with it, then turned it around from within. It is the same in our lives. How many times do we see the challenge in front of us, and in our minds we have lost ourselves before? How many times do we call it fate, when it's really just a collection of negative thoughts that we repeat in our heads? The general's double-sided coin is a symbol of the inner power that everyone possesses. The power to choose how to see, and with that gaze, create one's own world. It does not teach us positive illusions, but it teaches us spiritual responsibility, that our attitude affects everything we touch. When we live in fear, all actions become heavy, and our intellect is blurred. But when we live with clear faith, the same situation opens up new possibilities. This is not a miracle, but a natural law of the mind. In Zen practice, it is called the power of the immovable mind. Not that the mind does nothing, but that the mind is not swayed by the external environment. When the mind is calm, the action becomes right. When acting right, natural results arise. General Hosen had no control over the weather or the number of enemy troops, but he controlled his own temperament and that of the army, and that has turned the tide on the battlefield. Someone asked Hakuin, "Master, can you control your fate?" He replied, "No, but I can control someone who believes that he is controlled by fate." That was also what Hosen had done in the morning at that small shrine. He doesn't fight fear. He transforms it. He doesn't force belief. He suggests it. And when that faith was born, thousands of lives were saved, not only from death, but from despair. When night fell, Hosen sat alone by the fire. He turned the coin in his hand, looking at the two identical faces. The flame reflected in the old bronze light, shimmering like two eyes looking back at him. He smiled slightly. because he understood that the real war was still going on, not on the battlefield out there, but in the hearts of every human being. The battle between belief and doubt, between discernment and fear. A double-headed coin can't give us victory forever, but a clear mind can help us win in all situations. The Buddha once taught, "We are what we think. With thought, we create the world." When we believe in our highest ability, when we act with clarity and calmness, the world reflects back with the same frequency. When we act in fear, everything around us becomes threatening. Therefore, fate is not far away. It lies in the quality of the belief that we carry into each action. That night, when the fire was extinguished, the general said softly, as if wishing, "If there's one thing I can teach future generations, it's this. Don't wait for fate to tell you who you are. Throw your own coin and let your mind decide the direction of the fall." In the sky, the wind blew through the red ashes. And in each of those little flames, there is a light, the light of faith that has transcended fear, illuminating the path of man from thousands of years ago to the next. Now let's tell the story of a young monk who believed he had failed in his spiritual journey. His name is Golden Wake, a monastery student full of ambition, but also full of self-doubt. In a peaceful monastery perched on a mountain, overlooking a calm lake like a mirror, he sat on the temple steps, his back sagging under the weight of his disappointment, his distant eyes reflecting the sorrows in his heart. The sun slowly drifted towards the horizon. Golden and amber dyed the water red, shining on his tense face the rays of light at the end of the day. For months, Golden Wake struggled with his studies, trying to comprehend the profound teachings that fellow monks seemed to absorb with ease. He felt that he was never capable, never worthy of the path he chose, and that feeling of failure weighed on his every move. He turned to his teacher, who had quietly approached and sat down beside him without saying a word. "What can I say to my family?" Golden Wake sighed, his voice heavy. "They sent me here with the belief that I would return as a learned monk, able to guide others on the spiritual path. But now I feel like I can't do anything. The boat will come to take me home because I have failed in this monastery." The old man looked out over the lake, where a small wooden boat was crossing the calm water, slowly, as if there was no hurry. The sunset dyed everything yellow and amber, and the reflected rays of light shimmered on the surface of the lake, forming small ripples that spread into the distance. "You've done your best," he replied softly, his voice deep with the same wisdom that he had experienced for years. "And that's all anyone can do." Golden Wake glared, disappointment contained in his voice. "But I want to become a famous monk who can teach others. I want to lead meditation sessions so that students seek my guidance to make a real difference in the world. But I can't do it." He looked at him. His eyes were gentle but uncompromising. "You can." "How?" Golden Wake exclaimed, his voice sad and confused. "I can't even remember the basic classics. I fell asleep while meditating. I failed at everything that mattered." He smiled, pointing to the water. "Live from your heart. I'll show you. Did you see that boat crossing the lake with the setting sun behind you?" Golden Wake nodded in his eyes, trying to follow the lines of light reflected on the surface of the lake. "Do you see the awakening spreading throughout the lake? Do you see the boat look like the top of a golden triangle when it fanned out of the bow?" Golden Wake narrowed his eyes, trying to understand what he was saying, but the image was still blurry in his mind. He continued patiently. "That boat is you. When you leave the monastery, The lake is your life. Awakening is the effect that you will create in the world. Each ripple triggers another, and that ripple triggers another. By constantly striving to live a life as wise and loving as possible, you will teach the path of love to everyone you meet, just by being yourself. Some of them will pass on your good example to others, and thus that golden awakening spreads everywhere. Golden Wake looked at the boat drifting, his eyes wide in amazement. Each small ripple captured the golden light from the sun and reflected back to the sky, forming an ever-expanding triangle of light across the water, as if the simple boat itself was teaching him a profound lesson about life and the impact that humans can make without fame or great achievement. "Can you go home and explain all this to my father?" he asked, his voice for the first time no longer heavy with disappointment, but beginning to glimmer with hope. The old teacher reminded, "One candle costs nothing by lighting another." Through this teaching, Golden Wake realized that influence does not come from great gestures or perfect understanding, but from a heart committed to goodness, from simple but sincere actions. We often believe that only certifications, titles, or achievements are enough to make an impact. But Zen Buddhism points out that attachment to external recognition is a misunderstanding. True wisdom is conveyed through the quality of presence and integrity in our actions. In everyday life, this influence is present in the simplest places: the grocery store clerk who cares sincerely, the stranger who shows the way with a smile, the friend who listens without judgment. These small ripples spread, invisible but powerful, teach us that doctrine can be nonverbal but unconscious, conveyed when our actions are in line with our deepest values. Like a boat on a lake, we may not see our awakening, but it certainly spreads, touching shores we never knew. The Buddha said that thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the lifespan of that candle is not shortened. Happiness never diminishes when shared, and every moment of authentic life becomes a teaching. Every act of compassion creates ripples. Every choice that responds with wisdom instead of instinct sends light back into the sky. As Golden Wake reflects on his journey, he realizes the golden awakening he creates doesn't have to be great. It could be patience with a loved one, encouragement of a struggling colleague, or a genuine presence in everyday encounters. That light illuminated paths he had never imagined. The story continues with another lesson about the dangerous gap between conceptual understanding and actual life experience. In ancient China, monks wandered from monastery to monastery to learn and test their understanding. A special custom was formed. Before receiving overnight accommodation, a monk had to engage in a dharma battle with the abbot or representative, not by physical combat, but with intellect and spiritual understanding. Deep questions and paradoxical answers are used to explore the depth of each person's cognition. A famous monastery is located in the bamboo forest, where a tired monk arrives until darkness stretches over the courtyard. His robe was covered with dust from the winding mountain roads. His straw sandals were thin, but his eyes were still bright, full of the vigilance of a deep truth seeker. The abbot, who was busy with evening duties, appointed his faithful servant to make the encounter with the Dharma. The servant lost an eye in a childhood accident, but it was that limitation that seems to have helped him develop a deep inner vision. When the two met in the main hall, the monk proposed something unusual. They would argue without words, only with gestures, in order to convey the truth beyond words. The servant nodded in agreement. The monk raised a finger to the ceiling, holding still with a confident look. The servant replied with 2 fingers, and then the monk raised 3 fingers. The servant surprised him by clenching his hands, holding them tightly in the space between them. The traveling monk, faltering for the first time, looked at his clenched fists with a look of confusion and something almost alarming in his eyes. Finally, without making any further gestures, he bowed his head and left the hall, looking to the abbot with respect, but also disappointment. "Sir, your representative is too high for me." Through this story, the lesson is clear. Wisdom and awakening are not the result of titles or achievements, but presence, inner qualities, and the ability to spread positively to those around them, whether with simple actions or nonverbal gestures. Golden Wake understands that the spiritual path is not always measured by achievement, but by sincerity, compassion, and ripples that radiate from one's own heart. I must continue my journey rather than assume to stay at your monastery tonight, the traveling monk said to the abbot, his tone serious, but not lacking in respect. The abbot raised his eyebrows, a look of interest evident on his face, and his eyes lit up with curiosity. "Please tell me what happened in your exchange," he said, listening while preparing himself for a story that was sure to make him ponder. The traveling monk began to recount in a meticulous, quiet but colorful and expressive way. "I begin by holding up a finger, symbolizing the Buddha, who is enlightened, showing us the path to enlightenment. But the monastery's serving monk immediately responded with 2 fingers, pointing to the Buddha and the Dharma, both the teacher and the teachings he had given. In response, the traveling monk raised 3 fingers, the symbol of the complete 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community of practitioners. But it didn't stop. The waiter then raised his fist to clench, proving that the 3 were indeed a unified, inseparable reality. The traveling monk saw this insight, clearly beyond his comprehension, and realized that he needed to seek guidance elsewhere before he was worthy to stay at the monastery. The abbot listened to the monk's explanation with increasing amazement, for he knew well the character and wisdom hidden in the only remaining eye of his faithful servant. As soon as the monk finished speaking, the servant himself appeared, clearly agitated and breathless. "Where's that humiliating traveler?" he asked, eyes shining with indignation, his voice full of hatred. "I searched for him everywhere. It's inconceivable that rudeness is disguised as such a spiritual inquiry." The abbot, now genuinely curious, asked in detail, "What exactly happened?" The servant took a long breath, his voice high with deep insult. "He insulted me by holding up a finger, indicating that I only have one eye. Can you imagine? I thought we were engaged in a spiritual lecture, but he immediately drew attention to my physical limitations." Determined to remain polite despite this rudeness, the servant held up 2 fingers, showing that he had no malice, only wanting to admit that it was natural for the traveler to have 2 eyes. The agitation, however, did not abate, but increased as the traveler continued to raise 3 fingers for massage, indicating that the total number of eyes between the 2 was 3, as if to ironically emphasize the difference, ensuring that the servant did not forget his disability. By this time, the servant had had enough, and he clenched his fists into fists, ready to resist. But the traveler, calm and quick in spirit, realizes what is about to happen and runs away before any lesson can be taught with his fist. The abbot stood still, silent, admiring the vivid demonstration of how two people can experience the same event but live in completely different realities. The Buddha taught, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. This profound truth is evident in the meeting of the two monks. Each of them experiences identical gestures, but interprets them in diametrically opposite ways. Why do we often project our worries, insecurities, and assumptions onto neutral situations? Zen Buddhism points to the so-called eight worldly winds: praise and blame, joy and sadness, gain and loss, fame and disgrace. These psychological forces create the inner weather, coloring our perception of everything around us. The servant's sensitivity to the missing eyes made every gesture a personal attack. Similarly, the traveling monk's spiritual preoccupation led him to see profound teachings in acts that were actually just hurt emotions and anger. The quest for enlightenment led the monk to interpret increasingly aggressive gestures as more subtle lessons. The practice of meditation invites us to look deeply into our own interpretive patterns. How often do we let our present worries, past hurts, or persistent hopes distort our perception of the situation? A distracting behavior by someone can be misinterpreted as hate when in fact they care. A helpful suggestion from a colleague can be seen as criticism just because you are not confident enough in your abilities. This ancient wisdom teaches that the inner state creates external experience, and both monks are sincere but erroneous about reality because they see through the lens of their own psychological conditioning. So how do you develop the ability to see more clearly, less dominated by personal assumptions? Meditation offers two approaches. The first is to keep the mind unaware, open to multiple possibilities of explanation rather than immediately confirming beliefs or fears. The second is mindfulness of one's own emotional state. The attendant can recognize the sensitivity of appearance. The traveler can question his eagerness to seek the teachings, recognize whether he is seeing true wisdom or just projecting worries. The teachings remind us that it is the mind that creates the explanation, rather than trying to determine the correct interpretation of external events. The Buddha said, hatred can never be appeased by hatred. Only by not holding grudges, hatred can be appeased. If they both look with curiosity rather than defensively, they can learn from each other from this encounter. As we reflect on the conversations and interactions of the day, each person can recognize how their sensitivities and concerns have shaped their interpretation of the situation, distinguishing between reality and the meaning that the mind adds. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Don't look for it anywhere else. Understanding that the weather inside creates the storm outside helps us gain wisdom and compassion. The next story leads to another truth about attachment through the story of the chrysanthemum garden. In the ancient Japanese countryside, where the autumn mists pass over well-tended estates, there is a wealthy baron with a passion that is almost obsessive. His mansion stood proudly among the rolling hills, but it was the garden at the back that captured his heart. Hundreds of chrysanthemums bloom brilliantly, from deep purple, bright yellow to pure white. The baron spent hours studying each variety, caring for them with the tenderness of a father, combining encyclopedic knowledge with sheer dedication. But that devotion turns love into something dark. The baron cared more about chrysanthemums than his family. Wives and children live in fear, knowing that just one wrong step near precious flowers can lead to severe punishment. Many of his subordinates also felt his wrath if they accidentally broke a flower, The atmosphere became stifling, filled with anxiety and resentment. One autumn day, disaster strikes. A loyal subordinate, while in a hurry to complete the task, accidentally damages a precious flower. When the Baron found out, his rage exploded like a volcano. The subordinate was imprisoned, desperately ashamed, and according to the warrior rule, he decided to protest by seppuku, rather dying than suffering humiliation. The news came to Zen Master Sengai, a famous teacher of wisdom and compassion. He quickly arrives at the estate, preventing the suicide, but knows that saving a life does not solve the root problem. Sengai devised a radical solution. On a rainy night, when the chrysanthemums were in full bloom, he sneaked into the garden, brought a sickle, and methodically pruned each flower, cutting down hundreds of flowers to symbolize years of care. The sound woke up the Baron, and he rushed to the window, holding his sword, and was alarmed to see that his beloved garden had been destroyed. Sengai stood calmly amidst the devastation, hundreds of flowers falling all over the ground. "Even the weeds will become ranks if not cut," he said, his tone calm but meaningful. In that moment, the Baron's obsession shattered like broken glass. Looking at the flowers that were nothing more than weeds in the eyes of his master, he understood the distortion in perception. Excessive attachment turned love into obsession, care into control, beauty into a source of fear. From that night, the Baron never planted chrysanthemums again. The Buddha taught, attachment is the root of suffering. This profound message is evident in Sengai's dramatic intervention. When we cling too tightly to anything, even beauty, we turn love into possession, appreciation into a burden, and joy into a source of stress for ourselves and others. Tonight, when you encounter moments of your own tension or conflict, you can recall the story of the owner who treated a robber like a guest of honor. And from there, find the space between stimulation and reaction, where you can choose how to live. In that void, you can decide to face aggression with peace, embrace with giving, embrace fear with love, instead of letting it turn into hasty reactions or outbursts of anger. The Buddha's wisdom reminds us that it is better to say one word that brings peace than 1,000 empty words. Sometimes the strongest response to violence or hatred is not retaliation, but rather steadfastness in our commitment to compassion, knowing that love has transformative power that neither power nor material power can match. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, we are led into stories of contentment and the nature of desire. One of those stories is the journey of the stonecutter. High up in the mountain villages, there is a stonecutter who lives a simple life, unaware that he holds the secret of happiness. Every dawn, he climbed the winding roads that led to the quarry, where the heavy tools on his shoulders kept the rhythm of his work, and his heartbeat blended with the pulse of the mountains. When working among the rocks, he would sing the ancient songs of the mountains, the voice echoing throughout the valley, creating a natural harmony with the surroundings. Although he was poor by social measures, living in a humble hut with few possessions, his heart wanted nothing more than what he had. This simple life seemed complete. The rhythm of work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor, all make up an idyllic happiness, undisturbed by external desires. His heart was unconcerned with the world, and his heart was filled with contentment. But one day, he is called to work at the splendid mansion of a wealthy aristocrat. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened, amazed at the magnificence in front of him. Marble columns rise high into the sky, gardens stretch out in perfect symmetry, every detail meticulously cared for. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt a sharp pain of desire tearing at his inherent contentment. If only I had been rich, he sighed, then I wouldn't have to make a living by sweat and toil like I do now. To his surprise, a voice whispered from the rocks, "Your wish has been granted. From now on, whatever you desire will be given to you." That night, he returned home to find his humble hut transformed into a magnificent mansion. Lavish decor, glittering objects, and wealth present in every detail. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began to enjoy the luxurious life of the wealthy. But just after a hot afternoon, when he looked out of the ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The king sat in the cool shade, surrounded by eunuchs, servants, and bodyguards, seemingly serene and strong, completely unaffected by the heat. "I wish I were a king," he thought to himself, and immediately found himself reclining in the royal carriage, soft silk cushioning, moving through the crowded streets. But even in the carriage, the heat of the sun penetrated the thick wall, annoying him. He exclaimed again, "I wish I were the sun," and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe, a sense of magnificence, power, and power filling his body. But soon, dense storm clouds gathered, obscuring all light. "I want to be a cloud," he said, and immediately became a giant storm cloud, bragging about his ability to block the sun. When it becomes rain, he falls and encounters a huge rock blocking his way, a seemingly invincible entity. "A mere rock is stronger than me," he realized, and in that moment he exclaimed, "I want to be a rock." Immediately, he stood tall on the mountainside, feeling eternity and solidity. But not long after, he heard a crackling sound coming from his base. Looking down, he saw a small figure cutting pieces of stone, which made him realize that even the rock is not necessarily the ultimate, because there is always something stronger. "A little creature stronger than me," he thought to himself. And so he wanted to be himself again, a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain roads. But now something has changed. As he shaped the stones and felt the mountain wind, his heart was filled with deep satisfaction. His songs are back, richer than before, because he has learned to be satisfied with who he is. The Buddha once taught, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment is the greatest wealth." The stonecutter's story sheds light on the endless cycle of desire. We often run under different conditions, believing that happiness lies in the next transition. Each wish that is fulfilled reveals a different desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter realizes that it is futile to seek happiness through external circumstances. True contentment lies in the ability to accept oneself, in appreciating what is available. You can experiment with the stonecutter's wisdom. Find the song that comes when you stop trying to be anything other than who you are. When you realize that contentment is natural wealth and luxury is just artificial poverty. Next, the story leads us to the essence of true help and the goal of authentic teaching through an encounter between a psychiatrist and a Zen master. During an expert conference, this psychiatrist chats with a famous Zen master. He has spent his career helping people overcome psychological difficulties, analyzing problems, and applying therapeutic methods to improve mental and emotional health. Curious about how the Zen master approached help, he asked directly, "How exactly do you help others?" The Zen master listens, not only every word, but also understands the assumptions behind the question. After a second of silence, He replied, "I take them to a place where they can't ask any more questions." The psychiatrist paused, not yet understanding whether it was a serious answer or a meditation puzzle. Certainly, asking questions is important in the process of development and understanding, he continued. The Zen master smiled gently. The question came from a mind that felt deficient. When someone gets to a place where natural questions end, they've found what they've been looking for a long time. The Buddha's wisdom taught, doubt everything, find your own light. The ancient teaching points to the paradox. The real search is not through endless questions, but through reaching perfection where questions become unnecessary. We often think of helping as providing answers, but sometimes the most profound healing is to dissolve the questioner himself. Zen Buddhism points out that many problems exist only because we keep asking questions that perpetuate them. The psychiatrist's method focuses on analysis, understanding the origins, and developing management strategies. It is valuable and can alleviate suffering. But the master's approach suggests a deeper layer, helping people move beyond the framework they themselves have created, seeing that the essence of the problem is not outside of them, but in the way they look and ask questions. Consider the endless questions in your mind. How can I be happier? Why do I repeat my mistakes? What should I do with life? How do you find meaning? Each question implies that a person asks something missing, needs to look for something, is always in a state of deficiency. Zen Buddhism teaches that when we realize that the very deficiency is just a reflection of the mind, we can free ourselves from endless questions, find peace in our own full existence. Like the stonecutter, everyone can learn to be content with who they are, to stop comparing, to stop chasing things that are not really necessary, and to find joy in what they have. Learning this is not about giving up on change or effort, but about understanding the cycle of desire and realizing that happiness does not lie in the outward outcome, but in the inner perception and attitude. In moments of tension, in conflicts, we can look at the gap between stimulation and reaction. We can choose to face aggression with peace, with fear with love, with loss with compassion. The stories of the master with the robber, the stonecutter, the psychiatrist, and the Zen master all remind us that the greatest change is not changing circumstances, but changing the way we perceive and experience them. Only when we realize the completeness inherent in ourselves can we be truly free, truly living, and truly sharing light and love with those around us. But what if the person asking is the source of the search? In the practice of Zen, we recognize that many human problems are sustained by the effort itself to solve them. The mind that keeps asking, "How can I find peace?" is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present right now. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be unknowingly reinforcing the very feeling of separation, creating a feeling of unenlightenment, causing himself to get lost in a vicious circle with no way out. Every question, every search, even if it comes from good faith, can become a mirror that reflects inner insecurity. The master's method, which aims to get people to a place where they are no longer able to ask any more questions, is not to discourage inquiry or to promote ignorance. Rather, it is to guide them to a first-hand experience of wholeness, where questions naturally dissipate because there is nothing left to seek. Zen Master Bankai once taught, "The unborn Buddha's mind can handle anything that appears." When someone truly recognizes their own basic wholeness, questions about how to be complete no longer arise. Problems do not need to be solved. They are only recognized as temporary phenomena in the vast space of perception. This doesn't mean that the actual questions disappear entirely. What should I eat for lunch? What way should I go to work? These are still functional questions that serve everyday life, but they no longer disturb the soul, no longer create stress and desire for deprivation. Termination questions are existential questions arising from a fundamental sense of inadequacy or inadequacy. The Buddha once said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This doctrine reveals the same truth that the Master instructed. The real help doesn't come from giving people more things to do or more knowledge to learn, but from helping them realize that they are exactly what they're looking for. When we look deeply at our relationship with questions and searches, we see how much mental energy is expended just trying to solve life's problems, rather than living the experience to the fullest. If we stop asking questions that assume that something is fundamentally wrong or missing, what will be left? Psychiatrists help by analyzing, providing tools and strategies for managing or solving problems. The Master helps by pointing out what doesn't need analysis or improvement. Both approaches are valid, but the Master's method is aimed at the roots rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the search. Tonight, when you notice the questions that often occupy your mind, you can try to feel what lies beneath them. Can you find the space of awareness that exists before all questions? Perfection does not need an answer because it lacks nothing.